Hi, welcome to this series where I go ahead and look at some of the most recent research and give you information on that in a way that will help you along with some tips. Now, we align ourselves very highly with the Cleveland Clinic because our standards are much higher than standard of care. And we try to provide you with the most up-to-date, cutting-edge treatments, testing, technologies, and so on, so that you can best live your life. So the next few minutes, I'm going to go through some of the most recent research that has come out that I believe is going to impact you and help you with your choices, with your behaviors, as well as decrease your risk for heart attack, stroke, diabetes. So join me for the next few minutes as I go through some of these in a way that I hope will stimulate positive behavior change. We've all heard the importance of goal setting and the importance of having ones that are achievable and ones that can move us closer to optimal health. Well, there's some research that supports this. Recently, they looked at 19 to 92-year-olds and they asked them to look at their long-term goals and rate how attainable you believe they are. Then they contacted them later on, quite a while later, and they asked them how they had done. And what the results found was that the individuals who originally had rated their long-term goals as attainable were healthier and had higher well-being. That's really important, and it solidifies the reason why goals should be appropriate for you. They shouldn't be outwardly set upon you. Now, there are some health parameters we want to meet. When we're talking about long-term goals, we want to make sure they're attainable and that we also have goals set up so that we can get to the point to where we can reach those goals. And we try to help you along the line at the Optimal Heart Center as much as we can. And so an example is, the first thing you want to do is find out what your why is. Why do you want to be optimally healthy? And that can be the long-term goal. And that long-term goal can be, I want to be able to golf into my 90s. I want to walk my daughter or granddaughter down the aisle. I don't want to be a burden to my family. I want to travel into my 90s. And to get there, those are attainable goals. But to get there, there needs to be some intermediary ones that are attainable. And they start with, making sure that you're working on your muscle mass, on decreasing your risk, keeping your inflammation markers in check with Dr. Firemilk, analyzing this complex matrix of ours and helping us stay within the curbs. And as we take steps in those short-term goals with our help and with your effort, you can attain those long-term goals. So remember this, when you're thinking of your long-term goals, we're not telling you to make them low. We're telling you to think about making them appropriate, things that are attainable, not things that are based on when you were in your 20s, based on where you are now and where you project yourself to where you want to be. We've all caught a whiff of tasty French fries, and sometimes they conjure up images from our past. For me, I can remember going with my father and all the kids in the station wagon to get our hamburger and French fries at McDonald's. Well, we've heard the mantra not to eat fried foods. Well, there's been a recent research study that adds a little bit more power to this research and this information that we have. Looking at data from over 100,000 women, it was found that those who regularly eat fried food had an increased rate of death due to heart issues than those who did not eat fried foods on a regular basis, just periodically ate a very small amount. So right there, just a direct correlation between eating the fried foods and death as it relates to heart health. Now, we're here in this practice to try to decrease your risk of the disease that causes us the most pain and suffering and death in the United States, and that is heart disease. So consider the issue of avoiding those fatty foods specifically just because of that. Now, fried foods have high levels of fat and calories, and in restaurants it's even worse because they use oils over and over, which makes them even more negative to our body. So avoid that. So going out for fried foods, it's best to avoid them because that actually multiplies the negative effect that you can get. I love Jim Perko of the Cleveland Clinic, who says you should look at food as a loving relationship. Look at food as a loving relationship. You wouldn't commit or marry someone who wouldn't love you back. So when you're talking about food, you should pick foods that love you back. So rather than focus on foods that you can't have, the negative parts, focus on the positive things. What can you add to your diet? What types of foods that are nourishing and delicious that will add to your overall health and well-being? Those are the ones you should focus on, and not so much trying to obsess about all the negative things you might have. Think of food as a relationship. Pick those that love you back. So what we're talking about is colorful vegetables, baked wild-caught salmon or trout. We're talking about things that are greens, salads, nuts, healthy soups, grains, those types of things that will be a positive influence on your overall health as opposed to something negative. So if you like that and are craving that crispy texture, have something baked. You know, I've done baked kale chips before, and I've also done chopped up sweet potatoes, baked sweet potatoes. That's an easy way to kind of get that craving of something crunchy. So trade those deep fried French fries for something baked. Try to resist that, because the negative from those significantly outweighs the positive of that short-term taste you might have. Think of food as a relationship and only pick those that love you back. You've heard us talk quite a bit about sleep when you come and see us, and it is a very important part of heart health and overall optimal health. And research has shown that regeneration of cells takes place and is strengthened through good quality sleep. It's very important to have that. But most recently, scientists have found that the immune system significantly benefits from having quality, consistent sleep. And so what they found was that the T cells are strengthened, and their ability to attack viruses and to attach to other invaders and kill them, which not only helps us stay regenerated, but also healthy. So avoid caffeine at night, also alcohol. Try to get on a regular activity routine. Have a set go to bed time. Some people actually set an alarm that starts their go to bed time. Have a consistent type of routine, that the things you go through when you go to bed. Get rid of the TV and get rid of the technology. Get it out of your room. I can promise you that alone, the TV and getting the technology out, will be helpful. Additionally, make sure that you're starting to mindfully get into it in that evening when you're starting to have your sleep time routine starting. So mindfully start preparing yourself for that. You know, there was another research project that was recently out that showed that, you know, trying to make up your time on the weekends for some people is not a good thing. The researchers found that you're better off having shorter amounts of sleep throughout the week that are consistent than having deprived sleep during the week with the hopes of catching up on the weekend. Sorry to tell you that, but catching up just doesn't work. So get quality sleep. Talk to Dr. Firemilk and I'd be happy to show you some of these great apps that are out there that can help you monitor your sleep, and show me and share that information with me so that I can give you some more advice. You've heard us talk about, and you know that there is a benefit to walking to our general health and well-being. But a recent study looked specifically at what was the impact on a brisk walk and blood pressure. So the researchers took a group of men and women, and they had them walk for 30 minutes briskly, so moderate to high intensity, the heart rate was getting up, for 30 minutes first thing in the morning. And what they found was very interesting, that for 8 hours following that brisk walk, the group that did that had a lower blood pressure for 8 hours, which is similar to what happens with medications. Now they also looked at if they added a 3-minute low-intensity walk every 30 minutes. So if somebody was sitting around, they would have an alarm, and at 30 minutes they'd get up, and then they would walk for 3 minutes, come back, and continue on their day. 30 minutes later, 3-minute walk. They found that there was An additional blood pressure reduction in women, men didn't have the same benefits. Doesn't mean that they weren't getting benefits, but they weren't as dramatic and they weren't as significant research-wise in this study. So what does that mean? It means that consider a walking program because they're simple. You don't have to have any added gear. You don't have to join a club or have some type of membership. Now, other forms of activity will get your heart rate up, hiking, biking, swimming, but again, those are fine. Those are great things if you have time to do those and you can do them through in your routine. But if you're not doing something, having a routine that just has you walk first thing in the morning is a great way to help impact your overall health and well-being, as well as specifically, like this research paper shows, is specifically to your blood pressure. Dr. Firemelk and I talk a lot about intensity and doing minutes of activity at a certain level of intensity. So I want to talk a little bit about how you can gauge that intensity to make sure that you're getting the biggest bang for your buck so that the amount of effort you're putting in is actually going to give you the results that you're looking for. And so the research is showing and the recommendations that a minimum of 150 minutes of moderate intensity activity and as well as in a mix of 75 minutes of higher intensity activity. So mixing and matching, but these are minimums. Remember, we want to get more than that. And as I've mentioned many times, don't think that if you can't do 30 minutes a day that you're to just throw in the towel. Small amounts will build up. Give your body time to adapt. And as we take time off, like some of us do, and I find myself in those moments where I'm traveling or I'm doing something where I haven't prepared as well during those times of having visitors, for example, that my fitness level, my health level might drop a little bit during that time. So I have to back down my intensity minutes. I may have to back down the actual intensity of what I do. And so the question that we get is, how do I gauge this? Well, one good way is to have a wearable, because wearables will keep track of the moderate intensity or the high intensity minutes. And they have a little accelerometer in here. They don't really measure steps. They actually measure the speed at which you move, and then they estimate the amount of steps that you may have. And so with the Apple Watch, it has rings that show if they're health related types of activity you're doing that meet the minimum standard of a moderate intensity activity. The Fitbit has them as well. They call them exercise minutes, I believe. So a wearable's a good way to do it. You know, another way to measure it, and a recent research project looked at people just not worrying about whether they wear a wearable, is knowing how many steps you would take in a certain amount of time that you could gauge yourself periodically to get the feel for what a moderate amount of activity is in terms of the speed of your steps. And so these researchers found that 100 steps per minute on average, people are different, so about 100 steps per minute equals moderate, and about 130 steps a minute for this group equaled a higher intensity amount of exercise. So 100 steps per minute versus 130 steps. But what you want to do is feel that out and use maybe this type of, that I'm going to talk to you right now about, this type of gauge. It's called the talk test, and it's been around for a very long time. And moderate activity could be considered when you're doing some activity. So let's talk about a walk. You're walking at a speed where you're feeling your heart rate go up, but it's not too high that you can't talk. And if it is too high that you can't talk, you're going too fast, then you bring it down. And a good way to test that is if you can recite something that you have on memory, like the Pledge of Allegiance, or you might recite a nursery rhyme. So that if you can do that, you're at moderate. If you can't do it, you're at a higher intensity, and that's a good way to gauge it. So try to find ways that you can gauge the amount of activity that you're doing in terms of the intensity, and then the amount of time to meet the minimum standard of 150 minutes of moderate, 75 minutes of higher, minimal, or a combination of those two. And lastly, as I always say, I don't want you to forget about doing some resistance training, because your muscle is your insurance policy for quality of life. So we need to make sure we're also doing that. But the bottom line from this research project is that they found that most people at their average pace, that's not a slow stroll, but an average pace that they can walk, was found to be a moderate intensity. So when in doubt, walk your moderate intensity, and you'll probably be pretty close to where you should be in terms of getting the heart benefit of that activity. Okay, let's talk about fat loss. But I've got to get this out of the way right at the beginning. You can't quickly do it, I'm sorry. It just can't be done quickly. It just doesn't. There's no pill, there's no magic formula, there's no root that they're going to find or have found in the jungles of Indonesia that's going to melt fat away. It's a process. It's doing the process. And it's important to understand that as part of an overall health and wellness program, that you're going to be losing body fat. And what we want to focus more on is not so much changing our body fat in our stomach, for example, although we want that stomach to get us six packs. We want to look at the fat that's around our organs. And a number of research projects have looked at that and saw that this visceral fat is losing it is very important in decreasing our risk for heart disease, for dementia, for some cancers. So that's a more important area to focus on. So I want to talk a little bit about that because there was a recent study, a 12-week study, that looked at individuals who did a 45-minute cycling program several times a week, and they lost 8% of their visceral fat. Now that's significant in a 12-week session. That's going to have an impact on the body. When they looked at how precisely this was happening, one thing kept coming up: the positive impact on inflammation. Oh, inflammation. You've heard that before in our practice. You've heard Dr. Firemilk talk about inflammation. So this type of exercise was helping decrease inflammation and burn that visceral fat. There's significant ways of doing this, and it doesn't just have to be cycling. More research is needed, but the bottom line is accumulating 150 or more, and we're starting to say, as the new guidelines say, at least 150 minutes per week of moderate to high intensity. And don't think that, that's such a daunting task, I'm not going to be able to do this. Think of the long-term goal of doing that. Think of doing shorter bouts of it and adding them up till you get to that point, because it is attainable. Those are definitely attainable. So working up to that longer amount of time. Also, high intensity interval training is a good way to do this, is to get that moderate to high intensity to where you're getting your heart rate up and down. And that also has a benefit to the abdominal fat of doing those interval training. So that may be something you want to consider. And additionally, you want to also include 2 or 3 sessions of strength training, which are very important to this overall caloric expenditure, losing visceral body fat, and so on. Making sure that your nutrition is balanced, it's matches, we talk about that you have a balanced nutritional diet, that you're getting enough protein in, that your portion sizes are good. All of these things contribute to this loss of visceral body fat. When it comes to belly fat, having a diet that's rich in fiber and avoiding things such as processed and refined carbohydrates, processed meats, avoiding high sugar content, all of those with a balance of higher fiber types of foods are going to be much better for your fat loss, especially your belly fat loss. So looking at fiber-rich, plant-based types of food can have an added impact, an added positive impact on fat loss. And the other thing, last thing I want to bring up is, looking at saturated fats. One of these videos coming up, I'm going to be talking about reading labels and what to look for. And just as a bottom line rule, limit those saturated fats. If you see them on the back of the packaging, try to avoid them. A couple here and there are going to bother you, but if there's something that has 12, 13 grams of saturated fat, look out. All right. Well, I hope you were able to get some information out of all of that. I was hoping you were able to see how some of those might influence how you make choices and how it supports some of the things you're already doing and maybe help you change some of the things that you might have been considering changing. So please bring any questions or comments to me on our next visit, or nudge me or text me or email me, and I'd be glad to answer those. So again, please think of these as little bits of information that can help you on your path of optimal health.